The pass, the overtaking maneuver. This is the reason why the 2000 Belgian Grand Prix is still remembered nearly 25 years after it ran. That day in Spa-Francorchamps, Mika Hakkinen was unbeatable, though he almost lost the race. Hahowever, he managed to climb his way back and catch his principal opponent for the championship, the ever-present Michael Schumacher. But it is the way Hakkinen operated to pass Schumacher that everyone recalls. The race was certainly exciting, but the overtaking by Hakkinen on Schumacher was the stuff of legend. This is why the 2000 Belgian Grand Prix is a race to remember. For this episode, in order to help you distinguish between the Schumacher brothers, Michael Schumacher will be identified using his full name, or simply Schumacher, while his brother will be referred to as Ralf Schumacher, or simply Ralph. The 2000 Belgian Grand Prix was held at a time when Formula One had one of its rare battles involving three drivers for the World Championship. 1998 and 1999 World Champion Mika Hakkinen led the title chase, but he was in a fierce confrontation with Ferrari's Michael Schumacher and teammate David Coulthard. In prior years, Hakkinen had defeated a Ferrari driver both times, Schumacher in 1998 and Eddie Irvine in 1999, when Schumacher had to miss almost the entirety of the second half of the season due to leg injuries sustained in his Silverstone accident. After losing twice to McLaren, the start to the 2000 season led many in the F1 universe to believe that it could finally be Ferrari's year. Schumacher was the winner in the first three races of the season. It would take McLaren a while to catch up with the pace of the red car. We would have to wait until the fourth race of the season to see a Silver Arrow win. That would be with David Coulthard at home in England. The following race thereafter, Hakkinen would be victorious in Barcelona. McLaren split wins between its drivers, while Ferrari would not. So contrary to the years before, we did not have a definite McLaren contender for the championship when F1 was about to race in Spa. For a good portion of the season, Coulthard seemed to be able to be up for the challenge. The Scotsman would win in Monaco and in France, where he famously flipped the bird to Schumacher, those victories giving him the edge on his teammate Hakkinen for a while in the championship. But then the Finn was able to win two races out of three, in Austria and Hungary, to pitch himself right back into the championship picture. After looking worn out for the first part of the season, Hakkinen was finally able to find his usual form, and McLaren was able to count on its double world champion to mount a charge on Schumacher, just in time for the final portion of the season. So when everybody arrived in Spa-Francorchamps at the end of August 2000, Hakkinen had 64 points, Schumacher 62, and Coulthard 58. While McLaren was waiting for one of its drivers to distance the other in the battle, the team was not able to put all their eggs in the same basket, as Ferrari was able to do with Schumacher. It could be an advantage to have two chances out of three to win the championship, but it also could be an obstacle. Ferrari was not in a particularly good mood when it arrived in Belgium. There was a heavy atmosphere surrounding the team. Schumacher had lost the entirety of the big lead that he had built on the championship after his three season opening wins. At the time, it looked as though Ferrari was on the verge of losing. Again. Many were asking how many chances Ferrari could let go before finally winning the Drivers' Championship that the Tifosi dearly wanted since 1979. In Spa, the F1 universe had several indications that McLaren would probably be able to pull off a coup, something that would help them a long way to steal the championship from Ferrari's hands. That was what many thought would happen before the 2000 Belgian Grand Prix, and the signs would be even stronger after the race. All that because of an overtaking maneuver for the ages made by Hakkinen. The way the Finnish driver was able to get ahead of Schumacher near the end of the race was one of the most beautiful, most spectacular, aggressive, and riskiest overtaking in the history of F1 racing. The way Hakkinen overtook Schumacher in Spa in 2000 goes directly to a thing of legend. As soon as the McLaren crossed the Lecombe corner, it's a maneuver that will never be forgotten. When Hakkinen placed himself on pole for the race in Belgium, it was like things gradually returned back to what they were before. The defending double world champion finding his rhythm, and that he was more and more on his way to winning another championship. If he could win, that would make it 3 in a row. Quite the feat! More than 20 years later, after seeing multi-year dominations by Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen, it doesn't look that special to win 3 drivers' championships in a row, but in 2000, it was a big deal. At the time, it was something that had not been done since the 1950s, when Juan Manuel Fangio was the king of Formula One. But Hakkinen refused to think that things would come easily for him. He mentioned that Schumacher had faced some traffic in his fastest lap at the end of the qualifying session. It was clear to him that the German was fast and that he would remain a strong opponent until the end of the year. With Hakkinen on first row, we were surprised to see Jarno Trulli on the Jordan. Behind them, there was a young British driver, Jenson Button, on second row along with Schumacher. The other title contender, Coulthard, was only on third row, along with Michael's brother, Ralf Schumacher, in his Williams car. As it often happens in Spa, it would rain on the day of the race. The rain began early in the morning, stopping around an hour before the beginning. But the track was still quite wet when it was time to start the race, and the drivers had poor visibility. Having lived through the devastating crash under the rain at the start in 1998, the race direction does not want to repeat the experience, and in agreement with the drivers, they decide to start the race under the safety car. That means that instead of having a formation lap, the safety car would lead the parade for the first lap only. This lap would count for the race. After that, the safety car headed into the pits, and the drivers were free to race as soon as they crossed the starting line. That's how the race began when it was time to go, 2 p.m. Belgian time. Everyone except the Sauber of Pedro Diniz was on wet tires. Diniz would spin during the first lap. What was in fact a rolling start allowed Hakkinen and all who followed to keep the position they had on the grid to start lap 2. At full speed, it was clear that the track still had water on it, but there was already a dry line for racing. So the race was underway, and Schumacher was tempted to overtake the Williams of Jenson Button. At the end of the Kemmel Straight, going to Les Combes corner, he gave a look, but he understood that the move would be for later. The German had to watch his back too. Coulthard tried to surprise him at the same spot, but he was able to hang on. At the end of the second lap, the order was Hakkinen in first, and Trulli 2 seconds behind. Button remained in third, right in front of Schumacher, Coulthard, and Ralf Schumacher. It was quite an achievement for Trulli to have qualified second on the grid, but it was clear from the start that the Jordan did not have what it took to challenge Hakkinen. At the end of the third lap, the McLaren already had almost 4 seconds priority on him. And Trulli had other matters to worry about. Button charged at him at the apex of La Source to begin the fourth lap. But he broke too late, went too wide at the exit of the corner, and the Italian retained his lead. What was now clear is that Trulli slowed everyone driving behind him. Schumacher, for one, needed to find a way to get past him if he wanted any chance of closing the gap with Hakkinen. It was the same thing for Coulthard. This race was massively important for the Scottish driver. If Hakkinen were to win, there were many people that suspected that McLaren would choose to prioritize the Finnish driver for the rest of the season, and Coulthard's championship aspirations would go down the drain. At the bus stop, Button tried to surprise Trulli by going to the outside, but the Italian blocked him. This attempt would harm the young British driver rather than help him. When the yellow Jordan blocked the Williams car, it allowed Schumacher to take the apex and steal third place from Button. It was a moment where the experienced driver basically taught the newcomer a lesson. With the German Ferraris pursuing him, Trulli was now really under pressure. He went a little bit too fast coming out of the bus stop and came close to losing control at the end of the corner. That was all Schumacher needed. His Ferrari was quicker, and he overtook Trulli in quite easy fashion at La Source on lap 5. But Trulli was not out of trouble yet. He let Schumacher pass, but Button tried to overtake him at the same time. There was simply not enough place for the 2 cars in that spot. Button touched Trulli, and the Jordan went into a slow spin. Trulli later stating, "I think he was too aggressive. I was struggling with my rear tires under a heavy fuel load. He would probably have got past me soon anyway." Everyone then overtook the Italian. Things were looking promising for him at the start, but for now, his race was ruined. Coulthard was just behind the Jordan and the Williams when they touched, and he had to work hard to simply escape the collision. He slowed and chose to go to the left of the 2 cars. He was followed by Ralf Schumacher, who decided to go the other way, to the right. In front of him, going towards the Eau Rouge and the Rédillon corners, Button was slow due to the contact. Coulthard overtook Button before the corner, and both Williamses were alongside towards Eau Rouge, and Ralph was able to overtake his young teammate at that juncture. Every passing attempt at Eau Rouge and Rédillon is spectacular, as was this one. But this was nothing compared to what the race prepared us for later. At the same time Ralph overtook Button, Jean Alesi with Prost was the first to change his wet tires for the dry ones. Every eye in the garage would be on his lap times from now on. If he's fast, everybody would copy him and put on their dry tires. In the lead, Hakkinen now had a 10.8 second gap on Schumacher on lap 6. By the end of the lap, the German was the first of the leaders to imitate Alesi. The French drivers' times were encouraging, and Ferrari was keen to gain time on Hakkinen by changing tires before the McLaren driver. Remember that a lap is very long at Spa, and staying on the track with the wrong tires could be potentially very costly. Ferrari was willing to gamble before McLaren. Schumacher's stop would last 6.3 seconds. At that point, we could ask ourselves if McLaren had made a mistake by continuing. A few years on now, Ferrari had been the best of the top teams, strategy-wise. It was possible that Hakkinen and Coulthard just lost a considerable amount of time by basically staying on the track. It was a question that anyone who followed the quest for the Drivers' Championship could ask themselves, seeing the Silver Arrows pitting after the red car. It's at the end of the 7th lap that Hakkinen pits, 1 lap later than Schumacher. When he entered, he was leading by 17 seconds on Schumacher. His stop took 7.2 seconds, and he came back just in front of his teammate Coulthard, who had to wait. McLaren chose to pass on the possibility of pitting both cars successively. On lap 8, the order was now Hakkinen, Coulthard, Michael Schumacher, Ralf Schumacher, Alesi, and Button. The fact that Coulthard remained on the track had a dramatic effect on him by that point. That meant he would run on deteriorating tires for 2 more laps than Schumacher and 1 more than Hakkinen. In the process, he lost a ton of time, so he would return from the pits way behind the leader. Many thought that the McLaren should have called him in at the same time that Hakkinen had gone in and make him wait before him in the pit, but the McLaren team would later state that it was not a possibility. Today, this is normal practice, but it was true that such a maneuver was not the case at the start of the century, and McLaren was not the team to try these types of bold moves first. Their approach was much more prudent. Coulthard did finally oblige at the end of the 8th lap, but many feared that the damage had already been done. He was delayed for 7.2 seconds and came back out of the pits in 12th position. Although he would regain some time by the end of the lap, landing his car in 9th, it was devastating for him because he really needed to be on the podium, preferably on the top step, to keep his championship hopes alive. Now, he witnessed his quest vanish into thin air. Meanwhile, Schumacher had the fastest lap with a time of 2 minutes and 1/100ths of a second on the 8th lap. He was now only 7 seconds behind Hakkinen. On lap 10, he performed a lap in 1 minute 57.2 seconds, running a second a lap faster than Hakkinen. At this point, the race takes favorable turns for Schumacher. He is uncompromisingly faster than Hakkinen. On lap 11, he was only 4.6 seconds back. By lap 13, he added another fastest lap at 1 minute 55.1 seconds. For Schumacher, it was fastest lap after fastest lap. The more Schumacher continued to push hard, the more he caught up to Hakkinen. In the end, it has an effect on the McLaren driver. Hakkinen pressed the pedal hard in response to his challenger, but on lap 13 he pushed too hard. At Stavelot corner, he went on the curb and it was still wet. Hakkinen loses control of his car, and after it looks like he was going to regain control for a while, he went into a spin. When that happened, Hakkinen just hoped to escape the barrier and keep the engine running. Fortunately for him, he was able to do so, and he came back on the track. It was at that point that he sees Schumacher take the lead. The McLaren driver lost time in the process, 10 seconds overall. He tried to minimize the damage, but the Ferrari now had 6.2 seconds priority on him. Now in the lead, Schumacher did not stop pushing. He wanted to build the largest lead possible for the next sequence of pit stops. He continued to distance Hakkinen to grow a 10.3 second gap on lap 18. On lap 19, Schumacher was leading Hakkinen by 10.7 seconds, while the Finnish driver led Ralf Schumacher by 9.8 seconds. On lap 21, the German increased his lead to more than 11 seconds. On lap 23, Schumacher heads into the pits for a second time. The team changed his tires and he refueled. This long stop taking 11.1 seconds, returning to the track in third place, between his brother and Button in the two Williamses. With Schumacher now having a full tank, for Hakkinen now was the time. He had to push at that precise moment to allow him the opportunity to catch Schumacher. His car was considerably lighter than his rival in Ferrari. He had to gain sizable time on Schumacher during the next laps before he too would need to pit and fill his tank. That seemed to work. For the next laps, Hakkinen would gain around a half a second a lap on Schumacher. Meanwhile, Coulthard was unable to come back on the leaders. He now had to put his hopes on the next sequence of pit stops in order to climb the ladder. 4 laps after his Ferrari rival, Hakkinen headed into the pits. This was on lap 27. He had at that moment a 14.6 second lead over the Ferrari. It took 8.8 seconds to change his tires and to refuel. Hakkinen returned to the race out of the pits in second place, right behind Schumacher. Now both leaders could be able to go straight through to the end. They should not need to stop down anymore. On lap 28, the order was now Schumacher, Hakkinen, Ralf Schumacher, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and Coulthard and Alesi. Schumacher's lead was at 7.7 seconds, but he needed to be careful. Hakkinen had just gained 0.07 of a second on him in less than a complete lap. At this juncture, the chase was once again on. The difference was that Schumacher was now the hunted, not the hunter. The German lost more time while he remained stuck behind back markers, so Hakkinen moved quickly to just 5.8 seconds behind him. Since they put a new set of tires on, the advantage had switched to the McLaren camp. Meanwhile, Coulthard finally found a way to drive in front of Frenzen's Jordan. He does it in the pits by virtue of the work by the McLaren team on lap 28. On lap 30, Hakkinen was now only 5 seconds behind Schumacher. The Finnish driver was definitely gaining on the Belgian race leader. Hakkinen would go on to say, "We made a change to the car in the second stop. It made the car much faster." 2 laps later, on lap 32, the gap was now at a mere 2.8 seconds. But catching and overtaking Schumacher were two different things. The German was known to be a ferocious defender of his position. There were now 12 laps remaining, and nothing was settled. Still, it was pretty normal to ask how Schumacher would be able to contain his rival. Hakkinen was clearly the fastest of the two, as he was able to go flat out while Schumacher could not go on the curb as Hakkinen had done, probably due to the poor state of his tires. Using the curbs earlier on had made life tough for Hakkinen, but now it seemed that they would actually be of assistance. Meanwhile, Rubens Barrichello, Schumacher's teammate at Ferrari, and Jean Alesi both retired on lap 33, both because of issues with their fuel consumption. Some say they simply ran out of gas. But everyone at that moment only had their eyes peeled on the battle for the lead. On lap 34, the gap was now at 2.2 seconds. Schumacher now clearly ran on the wet portion of the track whenever possible. He tried to cool his tires as they deteriorated faster than they should have. That helped Hakkinen in his quest. Starting at lap 37, there was a sense that Schumacher was in a highly vulnerable spot. Hakkinen was very close to him. His lead had shrunk to less than a second. On lap 39, with 6 laps to go, Hakkinen was very close to the Ferrari at La Source, but it was too far to try a safe maneuver. You'll recall what happened between Button and Trulli earlier on in the race. Hakkinen was the fastest of the two. He had the luxury to wait. It was on lap 40 that he would seriously try and overtake Schumacher for the first time. He was faster by approximately 10 kilometers per hour in the Kemmel Straight, and the presence of back marker Marc Genet in his Minardi could disturb the German just enough to help Hakkinen. The Finnish driver would get the slipstream off Schumacher, and he found himself right in the gearbox of the Ferrari way before the braking zone. He then decided to go at his right to take the lead from Schumacher, but he found the Ferrari driver was there too. Hakkinen had to jump on his brakes to escape a collision with the back of the red car. The McLaren was just about to put 2 tires on the grass when Hakkinen was able to go back to the race line just in time to take the corner at Les Combes. That was close. A contact here between the two could have been devastating. At this point, Hakkinen was irate in his helmet. He would later comment on the move, saying, "It was a very hectic and unpleasant moment. Michael was holding the inside line, and I tried to put the car half on the tarmac and half on the grass, and it didn't work out." For him, a blocking like that at more than 300 kilometers per hour or 186 miles per hour could have transformed into a life and death situation. Schumacher had effectively changed direction twice, which the officials decided to tolerate on this race day. Hakkinen would say, "When something like that happens, you lose your concentration briefly. I wasn't sure if we touched or not and wondered if maybe my front wing was damaged. For a few corners, I didn't run at the maximum, just making sure the car was okay." Being the driver that he was, Hakkinen rapidly switched back to racing mode, but he would not be shy to tell Schumacher what he thought of his maneuver later on in the Parc Fermé. Schumacher kept a hold of the lead in the series of corners that followed. Rivage, Bouon, Les Fagnes, both cars overtaking Genet along the way. They completed the 40th lap and began the 41st with all indications that Hakkinen would try his luck again at the end of the straight. To succeed, Hakkinen decided that he had to go flat out at Eau Rouge, which at the time was still a risky move. For him, it was the best way to be sure he could beat Schumacher at the end of the straight that followed, this at Les Cômes corner. This was especially the case since there was again a back marker in the way. This time, Hakkinen knew that Schumacher could benefit from the tow by placing his Ferrari just behind the BAR of Ricardo Zonta, adding to the difficulty of what the Finn was about to attempt. For Hakkinen, when he crossed Eau Rouge, even he succeeded at full speed or he would have hit the barrier. It was as simple as that. When he hit the curb, he felt a massive load on the steering wheel. It was now or never for him, and he was able to do it. Hakkinen knew that Schumacher in front of him had been unable to do the same maneuver, giving him another small advantage, and he needed all of them in order to take the lead. Now that they were in the Kemmel Straight, Hakkinen was right behind the Ferrari. As predicted, Schumacher benefited from Zonta's tow, as the McLaren driver had profited from Ferrari's tow. They both reached Zonta, who for now only saw the red car in his mirror. At this point, there were a lot of things that happened in the space of a few seconds. Hakkinen was the fastest, and Schumacher tried to block him as he had done on the previous lap. At the same time, both the Ferrari and the McLaren found themselves just behind the BAR. Both drivers choosing a line because had they not done so, they would hit the back of Zonta's car. At that moment, the Brazilian was doing anything to keep himself out of the action. He dropped the anchor just to stay out of the way. In an instant, the length of a millisecond, maybe less, both Hakkinen and Schumacher had to decide where to go. Zonta looked to be heading on the inside, which was out of the racing line. For a back marker, it's the typical thing to do. Schumacher then decided to go on the normal racing line on the outside of the corner to his left, being confident that he already blocked Hakkinen with his move right before finding himself stuck in the BAR gearbox. In a way, Schumacher did exactly what he had to do. It was here where Hakkinen was both bold and brilliant. He decided to plunge on the inside of Zonta, which was totally unexpected by both Zonta and Schumacher. Hakkinen was prepared for it. He knew Schumacher would not go there to block him at the corner because the track was still wet in parts. Hakkinen later recognized that if Schumacher would have decided to take the inside, things could have gone south quickly. Happily for Hakkinen, it did not happen that way. Zonta suddenly found himself right in the middle of the title's contenders at a crucial time of the race and a crucial moment in the season. But at that moment, Zonta was not thinking of that. He did not have to. He only thought about what he could do to disappear from the track. So Hakkinen was on the inside. Would he be able to stay there long enough to come back in front of the BAR and the Ferrari? It was a long shot, to say the least. What happened next was one of the unique moments in the annals of the sport. In an incredibly dramatic turn of events, both cars overtook Zonta at the same time, Schumacher on his right and Hakkinen to his left. As soon as he passed the BAR, Hakkinen went straight in front of it, but Schumacher did the same, and the two drivers now found themselves alongside each other. Just after having overtaken the BAR car, both Schumacher and Hakkinen tried to go back to the racing line in order to take the corner. The problem was, it did not have enough space for the two cars. Someone would have to yield. Trying to go back into the racing line after having overtaken Zonta, the German was uncontestably surprised to see Hakkinen right there before him. He then made a slight move with his wheel to escape contact. By now, Hakkinen was faster than Schumacher and on the inside. He had the apex. It was there that he took the advantage he needed to be in first at the corner. Both cars were now in the braking zone, and they would have to comply if they wanted to take the corner. But at this point, Hakkinen was just a little bit faster than the Ferrari, Hakkinen making sure to take as much space as possible. Schumacher was beaten. Hakkinen had just passed Schumacher in one of the most magnificent maneuvers in the history of the sport. What spectators just witnessed was simply incredible. In a roll of the dice, Hakkinen gained everything, leaving Schumacher with the cookies crumble. Hakkinen had been more than brilliant. In the McLaren garage, everyone was smiling. Hakkinen kept his teammates on the edge of their seats throughout these last few laps, but he more than delivered with a maneuver that was beyond implausible. It was tough to believe what had just occurred. McLaren team boss Ron Dennis would not be shy to qualify that as one of the best moves he had ever seen in F1, commenting that it wasn't just a question of going to either side of a driver, it was also the wet part of the track, and that required commitment and bravery. Even Schumacher praised his rival, stating, "I was amazed that he went for the gap on the right side. Normally, you only have space for 2 cars there, but it seems that 3 can race there as well." For Schumacher, it was devastating. Again, in a mano-a-mano battle on the track, he had lost out, being flat-out beaten by Hakkinen. The Finn trying to win his 3rd World Championship in a row, delivering what seemed as a devastating blow to his adversary. Once in front, Hakkinen drove slower than on previous laps for a couple of corners. Even a cold-blooded driver like him needed the time necessary to stabilize his heart and make sure his car was okay. It was really close between the two. When Hakkinen took the corner at Les Combes, he was at 328 km per hour or 204 miles per hour. Hakkinen then continued to lead the race. He was not taking off on Schumacher. The German stayed close by, around a second behind, but the Ferrari driver did not look like he would be able to threaten the Finn. With 2 laps to go, Hakkinen led by 1.7 seconds. At the end, Hakkinen would win the race by a mere 1.1 second margin on Schumacher. It was a magnificent victory for the Finnish driver. He really had impressed the entire F1 universe with his move. Ralf Schumacher finished 3rd in front of Coulthard, who now looked too distant in his quest for the Drivers' Championship. With this win, Hakkinen extended his overall lead by 6 points on Schumacher. Hakkinen now had 74 points, Schumacher 68, and Coulthard 61. On the podium, Hakkinen was demonstrative, as though he had never been there before. He waved to the crowd and to his team, and even played the conductor during the national anthem. Schumacher, on his side, looked beaten, defeated. After the race, the German would recognize that Hakkinen was just faster and that he made an astounding maneuver on him. He would go on to say that he knew he was going to be passed, that if it was not there, it would have been at another corner later in the race. Already, Schumacher seemed more relaxed than on the podium. Many would have been knocked out after being beaten like that. But not Schumacher, and not Jean Todt's Ferrari either. Instead, they would do what they do best. They would work hard, and after, they would work even harder. There were still 4 races to go until the end of the season, and Schumacher and Ferrari would, contrary to what people thought after the Belgian Grand Prix, rise to be even stronger. In the following race in Italy, Schumacher was on pole and he would be victorious in that race. It was to be the same scenario in Indianapolis. With that, they could finally win the title they coveted so much for 5 years, if they could win in Japan, which is what they would do. Humiliated on the track, Schumacher and Ferrari had answered in the best way possible. They came out of the year 2000 world champions. Hakkinen and McLaren were defeated in the end, but decades later, people are still excited when they think about the overtaking in Spa. Despite Hakkinen having not won a 3rd Drivers' Championship, he became a legend anyway, courtesy of his overtaking maneuver in Belgium. For this race, the author was helped by watching the race on the F1 TV app, the Bring Back V10 podcast on that race with special guest Mika Hakkinen, and the Autosport Race Report by Nigel Roebuck. For executive producer Simon Bachand, I'm Jeremy Zaffron for the podcast A Race to Remember.